Mike Pompeo said there was an imminent threat in the region that prompted this attack on Soleimani in Iraq. Do you think that's enough of a justification for this kind of attack?
You know, there's a lot more to this than whether he was planning an attack. A guy like Soleimani was planning an attack just about every day, and that should be taken seriously. The question is, what are the repercussions of a decision like this? This is not a game. This is going to have consequences, and having served overseas, I know the real-life consequences that we could face, especially if this is going to lead to a war. Unfortunately, at a time like this, when it is so important that the American president and administration be credible, American credibility is unusually low. We are going to need our allies, we're going to need a strategy, and we're going to need answers fast to make sure that whatever happens next is going to benefit, not harm, stability of the region and American national interests.
Do you believe Mike Pompeo when he says something like that? Do you believe the administration when they say this attack was justified by the intelligence?
Again, the question is not whether Soleimani was up to something bad. Any given day, he was up to something very bad. The question is, was this a strategic decision? Was the role of Congress supported and respected? Were our allies consulted? And have they actually thought through the consequences that this is going to have? Soleimani was a bad guy under President Obama, and he was a bad guy under President Bush. But they did not decide to take on an action that would be as provocative as this, especially in a third country like Iraq. And I want to see whether they've thought through the consequences for what, if any, American influence and presence will be left in Iraq, or whether we just empowered the Iranian regime to consolidate their grip on Iraq. Maybe they've thought through these things. If they have, I would like to see them show that they've actually thought about it.
Mayor, Iraq's parliament is meeting tomorrow for emergency session on whether to expel the U.S. from the country. What does it mean for U.S. foreign policy if that happens?
Well, what we know is that it just became a lot harder for anyone in Iraq to support, and in Iraqi politics, to support an American presence. Now, I believe that we should not have invaded in the first place, but now that the situation is what it is, we got to make sure that American interests are protected, in particular that we have the kind of intelligence assets that we need on the ground. That just got a lot harder, and it's one of the examples of the secondary effects that we need to see if this administration has thought through or contemplated.
Mayor, on the New Hampshire primary, New Hampshire independents pick up a huge contingent of voters here, and I'm curious if you thought about how you're going to appeal to independents, undeclared voters. Do you have any particular message for them?
I think one of our strengths is that we have been able to reach out to independents. I'm not pretending to be conservative, but I am offering a message that will involve and welcome Democrats, independents, and a lot of these Republicans I talk to who are as disgusted as the rest of us with what's happening in this White House under the banner of their party. This is a moment like we haven't had, I think, in my lifetime, to draw people who haven't been part of maybe my party in the past, but who definitely don't want to be part of what the Republican Party has become.
Do you think Mayor,
I missed the very beginning of that. But for folks, there's 18-year-olds that are graduating high school that have grown up in war. For folks who are looking at the Middle East from beyond, what role can the U.S. actually play in stabilizing the Middle East?
So the U.S. has diplomatic, economic, intelligence, and informational tools, as well as the military. And the role of the U.S. should be one that only contemplates the use of force when there is no reasonable alternative, but does engage to try to guide things toward peace and stability. We cannot be responsible for the Middle East becoming a region full of prosperous Western-style democracies anytime soon. But we do have a security responsibility to make sure that American interests are protected, and a moral responsibility to do our part to advance peace and stability in that region. And every decision that the Commander-in-Chief makes bears on that. I'm gravely concerned about the consequences of the decision that was made most recently. And again, this is not a game. I know how many people, especially military families, friends that I serve with, are going to wonder what this means for them. The consequences could not be more real.
Mayor, you said that you want to remove all U.S. troops from Afghanistan, and within your first year of being president, if tensions with Iran continue to increase, if this escalates into a conflict, do you still want to do that?
We have already found ourselves spread thin. One of the things that made the Afghanistan mission a challenge was the invasion of Iraq that distracted our forces. If we now have further complication, volatility, and even engagement of forces in the Middle East, that can only make things more challenging globally for the United States military. It's one more reason, it's one more reason why we need to act to ensure that we draw down our larger ground presence in Afghanistan, and above all, work to ensure that we never enter an avoidable conflict or an endless war in the Middle East.
Mayor, are Americans safer as a result of the actions of last night?
Well, the world is certainly a dangerous place either way. Look, Qasem Soleimani and the IRGC in general, and the Quds Force in particular, did their part to make the world a more dangerous place. They will continue to do it, even though the leadership has just been killed, because somebody else will be in that role and as we speak is plotting retaliation against American interests. The reality is that we have seen time and time again how taking out a bad guy is not a good decision unless there's a plan on what to do next. And we have seen very little evidence of the kind of consultations, domestically and internationally, and the kind of strategic planning that would be necessary to reassure, certainly me, that this decision was made with the consequences fully understood.
You mentioned that previous presidents had declined to go after Soleimani in this way. What do you think is behind the timing this week, now, right at this moment?
Well, tough to speculate on that. We've heard some reporting that it may be connected to what happened with the embassy, but it does not seem to be proportional in that regard. This is one of the most provocative things, short of an outright invasion, that the U.S. could do with respect to Iran. And it's one thing to prevent an attack, it's another to launch a chain reaction, as may have just happened. And let's also look at how we got here. This happened because of a chain of events that began with the withdrawal from a nuclear deal that, even according to this own administration's national security leadership, was meeting its goals in terms of denuclearization. Needless to say, it is even harder to envision ever getting back to the table on that. You could also argue that we wouldn't be here if it weren't for the invasion of Iraq in the first place, which I still believe was a grave mistake.
Do you believe that, you just said this is the most provocative action short of an invasion, is conflict now inevitable with Iran?
I don't think anything's inevitable, but I'm very concerned about the volatility of this situation. Now Iran will be making whatever strategic decisions they have to make in terms of retaliation. It would seem that they're feeling pressure to respond strongly, and it's one more reason why we got to think about the moves, about the counter moves. What I was trained to look at when contemplating any destabilizing event is all of the different scenarios and patterns that could emerge, and we need some reassurance from this administration, and Congress deserves some reassurance from this administration that has been thought through.
Candidate Trump promised to bring an end to these long-standing wars in the Middle East. For folks that have become skeptical of that, is that actually feasible to have a light footprint and have a stable Middle East?
Well, look no further than northern Syria, where we had a small number of highly specialized personnel. Their job was not to turn Syria into Switzerland. Their job was to protect American interests and keep the worst outcomes from happening. They were doing that job well when the president withdrew them. There are many ways to make sure our interests are protected without following the drumbeat to war, and we should be extremely attentive to any risk of a future endless war beginning or escalating with what's taking place right now.
Sir,
Thank you.
Can a president or presidential candidate who hasn't served understand the gravity of the situation we're in right now?
Well, I'll say a presidential candidate who has served has a personal understanding of what we're dealing with. This is not a show. This is affecting lives not only of those I served with and military families, but of civilians, American U.S. citizens across the region, and potentially the entire region and ultimately the homeland too. This is as serious as it
Do you
gets.
think your competitors have that understanding as well?
I'm not here to say that my qualifications are a prerequisite, but I will say that they make me extremely aware of the consequences of decisions made in the White House situation.
Thank you.
Thank you.